The other pressure that is coming, I mean, if you were to see a Canadian government come in, and they were very close about 5 years ago to legalizing marijuana in parts of Canada, and that would have been absolutely huge. And the United States was threatening all sorts of things if it so did. If that were to happen, this would also embolden Europeans who don't, on the whole, like the war on drugs. I mean, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have been big war on drugs people. All they've done is handed over money to the Taliban and the Colombian cartels. I mean, their policies are just, frankly, ludicrous. And a lot of people who work in this industry know that it's ludicrous, including law enforcement officers. The key thing, though, that I think might change the United States policy is not Canada, but Mexico, because the prohibition of cocaine has turned northern Mexico, now the favored transit area of the Colombian cartels, who have in turn allowed the development of the Mexican cartels. This is now a slaughterhouse, northern Mexico. It's beginning to affect governance in Mexico itself. It is spilling out into the southern United States. You have this hideous irony now of the weapons used by Mexican and Canadian drug runners being bought in the United States and then smuggled into Mexico and Canada, and in exchange the US gets a lot of drugs, which its inhabitants are very, very happy to consume. And that destabilization of the United States, and the second phenomenon of the area of productions of narcotics moving away from developing world countries like Afghanistan and Colombia and into the areas of consumption. So marijuana production here in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in US, ecstasy tablets left, right and center, and so on. This may force a change because the availability of narcotics is going to be so dramatically improved than it has been up until now. It is also, if you were to change the war on drugs and essentially move towards legalization of narcotics, you would wipe out half of the world's organized criminal syndicates and the ability that they have to make money more or less overnight. So, I argue very, very strongly for a major drug law reform. Otherwise, you're just going to ensure that the bad guys continue to be very rich and continue to be able to buy weapons as the Taliban does in Afghanistan to undermine Western strategic interests there.
People listening to this may think, well, I don't buy drugs, I don't buy illicit cigarettes, I don't visit prostitutes. Organised crime doesn't really impinge upon my life. But there is a way in which organised crime is coming looking for you in the form of cybercrime.
Well, cybercrime, I went to visit some cyber criminals in Brazil. Brazil is an unlikely place in most people's minds as a center of cybercrime, but it's one of the 4 big cybercrime centers in the world. You have a lot of young people who are well educated, access to computers, but not access to jobs. This is the fastest growing sector of organized crime in the world, because organized criminal syndicates, who now what they tend to do is to employ keen hackers and crackers in order to make the money. They realize that in terms of detection, this is much, much harder at the moment. And there are millions and millions of attempts going on daily to hack in, not just to your own personal computer to try and get money out of your account, but also into big corporations in order to do so-called data kidnapping, where they can lock up your key information and you will only get it back if you pay a ransom of $100,000 or whatever it is, and they'll unencrypt it. Attacks on the Pentagon, attacks against state institutions all over the world. There is an exploding phenomenon of cyber crime and cyber warfare, and you are very, very vulnerable as a personal computer user. The second problem with cybercrime is the whole issue of identity theft. And this is a really frightening crime, identity theft, which is proliferating and has started to proliferate all over the Western world since the fall of Lehman Brothers. What you're seeing with the credit crunch is a shift away from some traditional crimes, the purveyance of services like women being trafficked for sex or narcotics. People have less money to spend on drugs, particularly recreational drugs. And so, as with anything else in the recession, they are going down. What is going up are 2 things. One is cybercrime and fraud, and the other thing is counterfeit goods.
Let me ask you finally, the book sort of describes a sort of arms race between the law enforcement and the criminals. Do you feel that one side or the other has the upper hand at the moment, and how do you see the future?
Yes, I think organised crime has the upper hand because what you have not had, as they have grown exponentially since the early 1990s, is any concomitant increase in resources available to law enforcement. You also have huge difficulties with issues like civil liberties, although it seems like the government in the United Kingdom is less concerned about those than some other governments. But that doesn't always help the police, in my opinion. They need more resources, law enforcement. They need to have better cooperation amongst themselves, both between, say, in the United Kingdom, between the various police forces and the central agencies like the Serious Organised Crime Agency. There's a lot of mutual suspicion between these organizations, not to mention between police forces of different countries. There is some improvement going on there, but it's not brilliant. Not nearly enough is done on something like those people being trafficked, either for labor or for sexual purposes. And it's interesting that, where you see the greatest concentration of human suffering as a consequence of organised crime, which is trafficking, you see the least resources being channeled into that by political instances, because it doesn't work that well with the electorate and, with populist media outlets. So there is a lot to do, but I believe that, like other major challenges facing the world, such as climate change, it is theoretically possible for the global political elite to actually do something about it. What is lacking is any sense of political vision or political will. And so while I believe that it's possible in theory to counter these problems, in practice, I think we have to take the skeptical view.